Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSite Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in Indian philosophy we will be talking about Charvaka, the classical Indian school of materialism. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy in School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
So, hello viewers. In the last lecture, we had a look at historical background of Charvaka philosophy. We looked at their views on causation, and we generally had an overview of their belief system regarding different elements and how they lead to more complex objects and so on and so forth. In today's section, we'll primarily look at Charvaka's view of consciousness and also their ethical views, which mainly comprises of criticism of different ethical precepts in other Orthodox schools. So let's begin with the Charvaka's view of consciousness. Before we begin with that, let's try and understand why they don't toe the same kind of line which is followed by most of the Orthodox schools of Indian philosophy. Most of the Orthodox Indian schools of Indian philosophy believe or give primacy to consciousness over matter, which includes Sankhya system, which includes Vedanta, and so on. Charvaka's being a school of materialism. So as we looked at it in the last lecture, for them everything arises out of matter. So now one big challenge before them is to explain how consciousness and material or matter could be related. How could it ever be possible that something like consciousness, which is completely of the nature of abstract, which is non-material, how could something like that result or could be explained in terms of pure matter? Now, this is of course a big challenge, and this problem has been there as one of the classical problems, not only in Indian philosophy but also in Western philosophy. So, in Western philosophy, Descartes. In the comparatively modern times, raises this issue of the relationship between mind and body. So he imagines mind as some kind of pilot in a ship who navigates it. So, but this has always been sort of one of the problems in philosophy to deal with, because matter, or in the case of mind and body is something that is completely is palpable, material, and consciousness or mind is of a very different nature. It's this non-material. So, but both of them together seem to result in what we call human life, human volitions, and so on and so forth. So, what kind of relationship between the two could be imagined? This is one of the classical issues in philosophy generally, whether we talk about Indian philosophy or whether we talk about the Western counterpart. Now, Charvaka's being materialist, this problem becomes even more difficult to handle, because if you give primacy to consciousness over material or body, then there are any number of arguments to prove, because one of the arguments is from dreams. In dreams, we have experiences which seem to be in an experiential sense, or in the experiential realm, they seem to be complete in themselves, in the sense that even in a dream, if I see a table, it looks like a real table, it feels like a real table. It's only when the dream has ended do I realize that what I was seeing in the dream, or the content of the dream, the perceptual content of the dream, didn't have a material counterpart. But within the dream sequence, it had everything, it seemed to have everything that we count as reality. But the journey from the other side is more difficult. How do we explain the arising or origination of consciousness from material? If one of the presumptions is that everything arises from or is a result of matter ultimately. So now, so for that reason, Charvakas particularly, it's a more difficult problem to tackle with. Now, with this background, let's look at their view regarding consciousness. So, most of the schools of ancient Indian thought agree in believing that there are 5 fundamental elements in the world named as Panchbhutas, which are basic underlying material stuff of all objects. These elements are Shiti, or earth, up, or water, Agni, or fire, Vayu, or air, and Akash, or ether. Out of these 5 elements, materialists reject the existence of ether as a fundamental element or bhuta, and accept the existence of remaining 4 basic elements, namely earth, water, fire, and air. Ether is rejected as a bhuta since it is not cognized or presented to any of the human senses. So here we can see that whereas other orthodox schools believe in Panch Mahabhutas, which means 5 fundamental elements, out of which everything that we see around us arises, including our own body. But in the case of Charvakas, they reject Akasha or ether as one of the Panch Mahabhutas, and the reason is, according to them, what is only what you can perceive is real. Now, Akash is something not. It's difficult to prove that Akash could ever be an object of our perception. Even in, say, for example, Kant, it is one of the kind of presuppositions of our judgment. It's one of the intuitions. But it's very difficult to prove that Akash or space or ether is something that we perceive. So, for that reason, ether is rejected as one of the 5 fundamental elements by the Charvakas. And also another reason is that it is sort of it looks like just some kind of an abstract entity. We sort of just like consciousness, it's not of material nature. Ether cannot be proven to be material in nature. So therefore, since it doesn't have something that is perceptible about it, therefore it is liable for rejection according to Charvakas. Now, since Charvakas believe that what cannot be directly known does not exist, they reject the existence of Akasha or ether as one of the fundamental elements. Furthermore, human body, according to Charvakas, is a product of these 4 bhutas. So these 4 elements, accepting ether or Akasha. Nyaya Visheshika and Mimamsakas, on the other hand, hold many metaphysical principles other than these 4, like soul, Jiva, God, Ishvara, and afterlife, Paraloka, which were rejected by Charvakas in toto. The reason for Charvakas' rejection of these principles is obvious. These principles are not confirmed by ordinary perception, but are posited on the basis of inference. Inference, according to Charvakas, is not a reliable source of knowledge, since it does not have a firm foundational basis. So, according to Charvakas, all these entities like soul, God, and afterlife are they are proved on the basis of inference, and inference is not a proper source of knowledge or pramana. Therefore, all these entities should be rejected. And also, they differentiate between the idea of soul and consciousness. They don't collate or they don't conflate the two. So finally, regarding consciousness, what Charvaka says, they argue that in our day-to-day life there is no convincing direct proof which would support the existence of soul, whereas we all the time observe ourselves along with the physical body, which moves and does other voluntary and involuntary functions. Therefore, there is more of a reason for us to believe that what we call one's self is identical with her material body. Interestingly, Charvakas do not equate soul with consciousness. Whereas they reject the existence of soul, they do admit that as sentient human beings, we are conscious selves. According to them, we do observe ourselves always along with our consciousness, except during the time of deep sleep or swoon. So here, this way we see that Charvakas do not believe that we have some kind of a soul seated inside some kind of a self seated inside or housed, inside our body. And what they believe is that basically, kind of a aggregate of different activities performed by our body, that is something we call as self. So first of all, first thing that we need to remember in the context of their view regarding consciousness is they do not equivocate the two. For them, self is a different idea and consciousness is a different idea. And according to them, they do not, the Charvakas do not deny the consciousness being there. So according to them, consciousness is there. It always accompanies the body, at least of a person who's alive. And we can find, since consciousness is assumed by them as an attribute of body, so body can at times be without consciousness, as we find it in the state of deep sleep, or in the state of swoon, or when somebody becomes unconscious for some reasons. So now Charvakas extend the supposition that everything that exists does so as a result of different combination and permutations of the four elements to the realm of mental as well. They argue that the human mind or consciousness is merely one of the evolutes of these four fundamental elements. So now what we sort of need to examine here is that according to Charvakas, consciousness is also a result of, just like anything else in the world, consciousness is also a result of the four Mahabhutas. So according to them, what happens is that these four Mahabhutas result in body, but result in a kind of body which has a particular kind of attribute, namely that of consciousness. So, a certain kind of combination of these four elements results in a physical, appearance that we call body. But this body is such that it has an attribute, a special attribute that we call as consciousness, which is seen always accompanying the body. So that's the idea. Now, one of the objections that could possibly be placed against this kind of idea is that we do not perceive consciousness in any of the four elements, which together are supposed to result in consciousness. Then how can these elements result in something that has consciousness as an attribute? It could be pointed out here that this objection presupposes Satkaryavad doctrine of causation in a certain sense. This objection is based on an assumption that if something does not pre-exist in the cause, it cannot arise in the effect. So one of the objections that is placed against Charvakas regarding this is that that consciousness is not something that we see in any of these four elements individually. So, say for example, earth doesn't seem to have any consciousness, Agni in itself doesn't seem to have consciousness, water also doesn't seem to have any consciousness, driving it. Now, if something is not found in any of the four fundamental elements individually, then how could it result out of them, even if in some kind of a combination? Second thing is that on the assumption of Charvakas themselves, only that thing, the reality of that thing, is to be admitted, which can be perceived. Now, consciousness is some kind of an abstract entity. It hardly has anything physical about itself. So now, that being the case, since consciousness is not perceived, then how could it help to be something real, even on Charvaka's assumption itself? So these are two major objections that are placed against Charvaka's view of consciousness. Now, how Charvaka's reply to these objections? Charvaka's reply to this objection with the help of an analogy. Just like the intoxicating power of wine, which affects our consciousness, arises from the purely physical ingredients which they did not have earlier, after they are combined together in a certain proportion and fermented. Similarly, human body, which is a result of the four elements, comes to have an additional property, namely consciousness, when they combine in a definite required proportion. Thus, consciousness on Charvaka's account is an attribute of the body. In other words, consciousness according to Charvakas is a byproduct of matter, and just like when something perishes, its properties also perish along with that object. Similarly, consciousness also vanishes when the body loses its unique proportion of the four elements due to ailments or sheer power of time. Once the notion of soul is rejected as baseless, belief in afterlife and death can also be rejected on similar grounds. So, Charvakas try to answer these objections through an analogy. They point out that when somebody prepares liquor, that is prepared out of something that is palpable, that is physical in nature. Now, when these material, certain kind of liquids, juices are fermented, after they go through a process of fermentation, this something which is material comes to have an additional quality, namely that of intoxication. So, according to them, we see it happening all the time around us, that certain things combine in certain proportions, and certain additional quality arises out of that combination, which was not there before. Now, obviously, when certain chemicals, when certain kind of material is made to undergo fermentation, it comes to have the quality of intoxication, which was not there before. In that material. So it's something new that has arisen because of a certain process which altered the combination of different of the four panchbhutas, four basic elements in a certain way. So according to them, similarly, in the case of human body also, when these four elements combine in a particular way, it results in some new quality which was not there earlier. And also, another way of looking at this example is that here we find that material can have effect on the consciousness. This also sort of raises important issues regarding the interaction between material and something that is non-material. Now here we can clearly see that liquor is something that is that is material in nature, but it has power to intoxicate our minds. It has power to alter our consciousness of things in a particular way. If there were no, if the two were different, if material and consciousness were two different realms altogether without possibility of any connection between them, then this couldn't have been possible. Now, in the modern day, scientists are working with this assumption all the time that that there's a physical brain which has consciousness in a certain way. So, consciousness is explained in terms of brain, which is a physical something inside human body. So, so that means the limit of consciousness are also sort of limits of brain. What we think, is defined in terms of different processes that are occurring in our brain. And also, psychiatry relies heavily upon the presumption that there are certain chemicals which do have an effect on our consciousness. So here we see that this explanation that is offered by Charvaka seems to be very much in place, in the sense that we all the time see that material does have an effect on our consciousness, and as a matter of fact, if we look at modern day psychology and psychiatry, the other way around is also true. I mean, if somebody is for a very long time in a particular mood, say for example somebody happens to be sad for a long time for certain environmental reasons for that matter, it alters the chemical combination in the brain as well. So certain results, certain kind of sort of episodes happening in our consciousness could also result in altering the chemical balance inside our body. Now we also know that different kinds of sort of stress mechanism, mental stress, results in physical ailments. So, Charvaka's reply, therefore, seems to be very much in place, and we see it happening all the time. And now, today, sort of modern day scientific medical practices also attest to this fact. So, therefore, according to Charvaka's, consciousness is a byproduct of body, in the sense that the four bhutas, or four basic elements, combine in a particular way, in particular combinations, and as a result, consciousness arises, or another way of putting it would be the body arises. I mean, the result is a body which has consciousness as one of its properties. So here, consciousness, according to Charvaka's, can be explained in terms of material alone. And also, as we have already seen, that they reject the notion of soul, and they don't equivocate it with consciousness. And another thing they point out is that consciousness is in a certain way co-eval and coterminous. One cannot be sure whether it's coextensive also, because we have consciousness of certain things which do not seem to be coextensive with body, but it seems to be co-eval with body, and also seems to be coterminous. When body ceases to exist, consciousness also ceases to exist. So that means we can have body without consciousness, as we see, observe it when somebody's going, is asleep, somebody is, in a state of deep sleep, or at times people become unconscious for certain reasons. So during those times, body is there without, consciousness accompanying it. But we cannot talk about consciousness without body. So, according to Charvaka, this is another proof, another evidence that we have for proving that consciousness is a result of body, not the other way around. So this way they try to demonstrate the primacy of body over consciousness. Now let's look at some more criticisms against Charvaka's view of consciousness. Now, some critics point out that Charvaka's acceptance of consciousness is not consistent with their belief in perception as the only source of knowledge. In answer to this, it could be pointed out that Charvaka's claim that consciousness is actually a subject of perception. They point out that living beings are always perceived to possess consciousness. Further, what many call as soul is nothing more than conscious living body. In Sanskrit, Chaitanya Vishishta Deha Eva Atma. So, according to Charvakas, we have a direct evidence of self being identical with the body, since we often say in our day-to-day judgments, I'm fat, I'm thin, and so on and so forth. So according to Charvakas, consciousness is something which is a matter of perception. So in the sense that we perceive body and we perceive it along with consciousness as one of the attributes. So therefore, according to them, we perceive people as conscious or at times not being conscious. So it's a matter of perception, and according to them, what we call soul is nothing but a living body along with its consciousness. So Chaitanya Vishisht, meaning something of which Chaitanya is a Vishishtata or distinction. So such Deha is Atma. So according to them, self is nothing but an appellation, name given to a body accompanied by consciousness. So, according to them, we have direct evidence of consciousness. We know consciousness directly. We perceive consciousness. We have a direct knowledge of consciousness. Therefore, they don't accept the criticism that consciousness cannot be known through perception. And according to them, we identify our notion of the self with our body all the time. And as we just saw, they gave several examples. So at times we say, I'm fat, I'm thin, I have gray hair, I have so on and so forth. So people all the time, in general parlance, or what we call lok vyavara, we find people all the time identify themselves with different attributes of their body. And for that matter, another thing is we recognize people through through their appearance. What other way could we have to recognize somebody else? So this is one of the important. These are some of the important criticisms that are placed against Charvaka's view of consciousness, and this is how they are answered by the Charvakas. So thank you. Welcome back, viewers. So we were looking at some of the criticisms that are placed against Charvaka's view of consciousness, and in that context, we saw that one of the important criticisms that is placed against them is that material being of a very different nature cannot result in consciousness. And we saw how this criticism is answered by the Charvakas. Now, another objection that is placed against the Charvaka's view of consciousness is that given the fact that they accept only perception as the valid source of knowledge, they cannot hold four elements or their atoms to be the ultimate constituents of human beings, since these elements are not subject to or available for perception. This argument could be more simply formulated in the following way. According to Charvakas, perception is the only proof or source of knowledge. Four basic elements are not directly perceived in human body. Therefore, the belief that human body are a product of four fundamental natural elements cannot be proved. Thus, the belief that we are composed of four elements as our basic constituents seems to be more of a subject matter of inference rather than perception, and therefore unacceptable on Charvaka's tenets or their premises. We cannot be sure about why in that case Charvaka should have accepted the existence of four fundamental elements at all if they were to reject inference as the source of knowledge. Now, this objection is also important because the fundamental point, the main point that is being raised here is that Charvakas believe that our body itself is a result of four basic elements. But where do we see those four elements? If now, let's combine it with another of their premise that only something which is available for perception could be held to be real. Now, if we follow this principle, then where do we see these four elements in our body? It's only a piece of inference in the sense that we believe that it's only the four elements which are responsible for everything, for the production of anything and everything in the universe. Therefore, body also must be a result of these four fundamental elements only. But if perception is the only source of knowledge, as it is on the presumptions followed by Charvakas, then we do not see these four elements actually in our body. So therefore, we do not have a direct proof, to be able to convince the opponent that these four elements are what result in physical body, which has consciousness as one of its special attributes. Therefore, Charvakas cannot, given their tenets, hold the view that consciousness is an attribute, is a quality of the body. Now, one of the possible replies to this objection could be, and that which is actually offered by some of the scholars, is that the view that there is good amount of evidence to suggest that the doctrine of fundamental elements was a popular doctrine around the time of Charvakas, and since Charvakas were the philosophers who tried to construct a philosophy on the basis of common prevalent beliefs or notions, therefore this notion common at that time, the view of four elements, was also accepted. But what one should note here is that Charvakas in this view are being equated with atomists, which is a bit unwarranted. All that Charvakas are stating through their doctrine of four elements is that living body consists of them. It would not be an overstatement to say that the view of four elements is very much in keeping with the other tenets of Charvakas, because the elements of fire, earth, air and water are undisputably the subject matter of direct perception. So the point here is that Charvakas, as we saw in the last lecture, another name that's used for them is Lokayata. which means people who defend the common sense views of general population around that time. So loka, which refers to general people, general laity of that particular time. So since they uphold the views that were generally prevalent among people and defend them, and since the view of four elements was also one of the prevalent views around their time, so therefore they accepted. Another point, which another way of defending Charvakas could be that if we object against their presumption that we don't see the atoms of these four elements, then we would be equivocating them with atomists. Now, atomism is a very different kind of philosophical view, which materialists may or may not hold. So there could be some materialists who would hold, say for example, Naiyayikas, even though they are an orthodox school of philosophy, they do believe in the reality of Parmanu, the smallest unit of a particular kind of material. So according to them, there is a Parmanu of earth, there is an atom of air, there is an atom of water. And according to them, it's only when three atoms combine that they come to have any dimension at all. So a physical dimension, an element comes to have only when a minimum of three elements combine. That is on the basis of Nyaya philosophy. Now, Charvakas are not atomists of the same kind. So, therefore, certain realists, who sort of would not reject, the idea that there is, physical counterpart in the world. So, even those philosophers could be atomists, and to be a materialist, it's not necessary for a philosopher to subscribe the view of atomism. Therefore, Charvakas may believe that there are only four fundamental elements without believing that there are atoms, corresponding to those four elements. So, and according to them, according to this possible reply, these four elements are very much subject matter of perception. We see water in isolation, we see air, we can feel it. So therefore, all the other four elements are available for perception. So this is one of the possible replies that Charvakas could offer. Apart from that, they could also say that not only do we perceive these fundamental elements as individual elements in river, forest, etc., but we also perceive them in combinations. Therefore, it is not unwarranted to state that human bodies and minds are also a result of these elements. But this is only one possible defense of the Charvakas. One cannot say with any degree of surety what exactly is Charvaka's reply to such criticisms, since most of their works are now lost, and we know about their views only by inference from the writings of their opponents. It is very difficult, therefore, to be fair in our assessment of their thought, since we are very likely to misinterpret their position. So, another point that Charvakas might raise about this, that atoms are not perceivable. So, atoms of these four elements are not perceivable, is that these elements, that they do not. One possible defense is that they are not atomists, and these four elements are perceivable, and they are not only perceivable individually, but we find them in different combinations as well. Say, for example, mud. Mud is produced, by a combination of earth and water, and so there could be other. So there could be other examples. Say, at times the air is humid, and at times it's more dry. So that means air can carry water, can mix up with water in a certain way, and so on and so forth. So the point here is that not only we see these 4 elements individually, but we also see them in different combinations. Their combinations are possible, and if that is the case, then there is no reason why we should say that these 4 elements or body cannot be a result of these 4 elements. So these are some of the possible replies from the Charvaka's point of view. So hopefully by now it should be clear how Charvakas defend their view that consciousness is a quality of a body. It's secondary to the body. Which is the material self is primary to consciousness. Has primacy over consciousness. So now, having understood the views of Charvakas regarding consciousness, we can move on to their views on epistemology. Now, some of the important questions that Indian epistemology concerns itself are: which cognitions should be certified as cases of knowing per se? What should be the criteria of such certification? Which sources of knowledge should be deemed as valid, and which shouldn't be deemed as which others should be deemed as invalid? So these are some of the questions, important questions that are raised in epistemology when it comes to classical Indian philosophy. In answer to the first question, Charvakas point out that only direct cognitions involving perception should be considered as cases of knowledge per se. In answer to the second question, which is regarding the criteria of certification, Charvakas reply that direct perception provides us the direct unmediated proof for our own selves to see, whereas other sources provide us knowledge which involves other presumptions and beliefs and thus involves mediation. So according to them, the central point of epistemology is the knowing person. And only those cognitions which are directly available to us, which are directly available to this knowing person, gyata, the Sanskrit word for it. So anything that is directly perceived, directly available, directly cognized by the person who knows should only be admitted as a true cognition. So only these kinds of direct cognitions should be held to be true cognitions or knowing episodes or episodes of knowledge per se. Anything which involves mediation, which is mediation here would mean something that is not direct, where we make certain kind of calculation based on our past experiences and so on and so forth. Those kind of knowing episodes would not or should not, according to Charvakas, be deemed as cases of knowing. Now, Charvakas are highly skeptic about any kind of mediatory process in the process of knowing, as it could involve self-interest and coercion towards some preconceived ends. For these reasons, some others, they conclude that only, for these reasons, among others, Charvakas conclude that only perception should be considered as the source of knowledge and other sources should be discarded as invalid. Another reason for holding such view by Charvakas is that Charvakas believed in the gratification of the senses, resulting in pleasure as the only aim of life. The world of sensuous pleasure is the world of here and now. Therefore, perception which involves the knowledge of here and now only could be acceptable to them. So this is another reason why perception is supposed to be the only valid source of knowledge according to Charvakas. So there here we can see like a certain kind of social sort of awareness that Charvakas are working with. So according to them, any kind of entities which are proved on the basis of inference, or which involve some other kind of arguments, which involve certain kind of mediation, could be the entity that we are trying to prove could be such entities which help certain groups to have hegemony over certain other groups. So, say for example, the Varna system. I mean, so the argument that is offered for that is, we could say, verbal testimony, since Purush Sukta, talks about 4 different body parts of the cosmic Purusha. So all such kind of inferences, would result in certain kind of notions which give hegemony to certain groups. So here we find that Charvaka's review, I mean, they sort of, take into consideration the different epistemological concepts from the point of view of some of the social realities that were prevalent around their time. Now, after that, let's look at how Charvaka's, what reasons Charvaka's offer against other sources of knowledge. So regarding Anumana, Charvaka's, they are regarding their criticism against Anumana, Charvaka's main criticism against inference as the source of knowledge is that, according to them, knowledge must be indubitable and true to reality and should leave nothing to imagination. Inference does not fulfill this demand, because in inference we make a prediction about the present case based upon our previous experiences, but any number of observed cases of a certain kind cannot result in the kind of logical necessity that we assume in a case of inference. For example, on the basis of our previous experience of observing fire and smoke together, we cannot say with the absolute degree of certainty that all cases, including all the future cases of smoke, are going to be the cases of fire as well. Further, the knowledge of Vyapti, that is crucial for establishing the major premise of the Nyayika's inference, can only be established if we have knowledge of all the cases of smoke, which includes cases in the future, cases in the past. All the cases of smoke as accompanied by fire in the present moment itself, which according to Charvaka's is not possible without contradiction, in the sense that we cannot have knowledge of the future cases in the present, because they'll make the very distinction between future and present redundant. So it'll involve certain kind of contradiction. So another point that Charvaka's raises is that since inference involves a leap from observed cases to a prediction about the unobserved cases, Vyapti, according to Charvaka's, can never be established. Vyapti means relationship of concomitance between the two entities that we consider in inference. Say for example, fire and smoke, both are supposed to be always accompanied by each other. They are always seen together. So therefore they are held to have a relationship of Vyapti. So Vyapti, according to Charvaka's, can never be established, and hence inference cannot be held to be means of knowledge or pramana. Now, in answer to this, one might say that there are certain uniformities always observed with respect to certain objects. Say, for example, sun rises always in one direction, namely east, and always sets in the west. Certain seasons invariably follow others. Sowing of certain seeds results only in certain plants and not others. If there were no universal laws in nature, then how could we account for such uniformities that we observe? But, as pointed out earlier, Charvakas hold the Swabhava view of causation, and therefore, according to them, only because certain things have certain essential own nature or Swabhava, we observe certain uniformities with respect to those things. We do not require supposing any supernatural principle to account for such uniformities like Nyayikas and Mimamsakas do. So, according to them, these uniformities that we find is because of the very nature of those particular things. Say, for example, it is the very nature of fire that it always goes upwards. It is in the very nature of, it is in the very nature or swabhava of water that it always goes downwards, and so on and so forth. So, therefore, all the occurrences in the universe are or uniformities that we find in the universe are explainable in terms of the swabhava of their constituent elements. We don't require any metaphysical postulates to account for these uniformities, according to Charvakas. Now, having seen Charvaka's criticisms against inference, we can move on to Charvaka's criticisms against verbal authority as pramana. Charvakas also reject the verbal authority which is accepted by all the orthodox schools of Indian philosophy. In this regard, Charvakas point out that words are heard through ears, and thus communication relies upon sensory perception in a certain way. And thus, as a communicative device, there is no problem with knowing through words in ordinary parlance. But insofar as words suggest the existence of things which is never perceived but held to be true, based on the authority of the source of those words, verbal authority becomes suspect as a pramana for Charvakas. What reasons do we have to believe that such authority could not be misleading? Does a so-called apta or trustworthy person become apta because she always speaks the truth, or she always speaks the truth in virtue of her being an apta person? So the point that is being raised here is that we do not have any reason to believe in, to trust in verbal authority. So in ordinary parlance, words, are a form of sounds, and we perceive them and we understand their meaning. So in that sense, it's verbal communication could be held to be a part of perception. But verbal authority means much more, when we talk about verbal authority as a source of knowledge or as pramana, which involves a certain kind of trust or in certain kind of faith in the truth of the words of a particular person or a particular text. Now, this is this authority that the Charvakas question. So, according to them, these words should be held to be true because they are spoken by a particular kind of a person, or that person becomes trustworthy because that person always tells the truth. So these are two different questions. These are two different kind of questions, and therefore the very notion of apta becomes problematic according to Charvakas, because if a person is supposed to be trustworthy because we have always seen that person to be trustworthy, then it will become a case of inference that the belief that person would always speak the truth becomes a case of inference, and therefore rejectable according to Charvakas. And there is no reason why we should believe that a person always tells the truth apart from the inference that he or she has always told the truth in the past. So therefore, in both the cases, verbal testimony verbal authority should be rejected. Now let's move on to some of the rebuttals against Charvaka's criticisms against inference. Now, inference as a pramana seems to be important not only from the point of view of proving the existence of some of the metaphysical entities like soul, God, etc., but is also crucial for the day-to-day activities in our common life. Nayayikas, being philosophers who also believe in lok vyavhara as an indirect proof, are specially put under stress by the Charvaka's criticism of inference as pramana. Therefore, one of the most convincing rebuttal of Charvaka's argument against inference as a valid source of knowledge comes from the Navya Nayayika Gangesha. Gangesha argues that inference is not only used for metaphysical purposes but also used for having some workable idea of the immediate future or incumbent event, or to have some trustworthy notion of other distant objects without which lok vyavhara would become impossible. So Charvakas particularly are alarmed by Charvaka's criticism of inference, because in lok vyavhara we do it all the time. Our lives wouldn't be possible if we don't believe in the power of inference. Say, for example, I eat my food believing that it's just going to satiate my hunger. I if water is visible somewhere, I make the effort to go there and have water because I believe that it will quench my thirst. Furthermore, Gangesha Upadhyaya points out that Charvaka's argument that inference is not a valid means because if you perceive many things 100 times, there is no guarantee that in future it will be the same as is itself a result of inference. So, in criticism of inference would invariably involve some kind of inference. What Gangesha intends to say here is that Charvakas cannot have any direct proof to refute conclusively that inference is not a valid source of knowledge. Refuting the possibility of knowledge of Vyapti as the basic requirement of inference, as Charvakas do, is itself a work of inference. From this, he concludes that Charvaka's position on inference digs the very ground where it stands. To understand it in simpler terms, we could formulate Charvaka's argument in the following way. All acts of inference require knowledge of Vyapti. Knowledge of Vyapti is impossible, therefore inference is impossible. So, therefore, there is also another variant of the same argument, which is as follows. It stands to reason and observation that thoughts and ideas, being abstract, are not perceived. In order to understand even the opponent's argument, we have performed several acts of implications to arrive at some understanding of any philosophical position. In that sense, any argument, even against the opponent's views, involves some kind of inference. The same is true about defending one's own thesis against others. In that sense, any philosophical debate, vad, proof, pramana, and refutations, khandana, are possible only by resorting to laws of thought, which is nothing but different acts involving inference. Even in our day-to-day life or lok vyavhara, it would be impossible to communicate meaningfully with others without understanding implication of what they are saying, which involves inference. So therefore, all in all, the idea is that inference is something that is inevitable in our daily lives, and therefore we cannot do away with that. Now, the possible rebuttals against Charvaka's view on inference is that since lok vyavhara is an important consideration in Nyaya philosophy, inference is one of the most important pramanas for Nyayikas. Since our daily lives depend too heavily upon inference, Udayana therefore expresses the horrors of rejecting inference as pramana on practical grounds as follows. I quote, "If this doctrine is consistently applied and people begin to disbelieve all that they do not perceive at any particular time, then all our practical life will be seriously disturbed and upset." Nayayikas also point out that occasional errors arising in the cases of inference alone cannot be held to be the reason enough to refute inference as a valid means of knowledge. Also, the same argument can be applied against perceptual knowledge as well, since very often we judge things in our perception to be what they are actually not. So occasional errors are not reasons enough why we should reject inference. So now, if we if you have a review of the rebuttals against Charvaka's view on inference, then we would find that what is significant to observe in both the above arguments, the above stated arguments, is that the underlying objection here is that all logical arguments are a species of inference. Therefore, since Charvakas do offer logical arguments against other schools of thought, they cannot claim to reject inference altogether. But the moot point here is whether all logical arguments are species of inference or could be equated with some kind of inference. Now, this is something that could be debated and and falls outside the purview of our present lecture. So here we could skip some of, or maybe now one important citation that comes from Professor R.K. Bhattacharya, one very important scholar. According to him, the Charvakas repudiate the organs of knowledge like inference, verbal testimony, etc., which are a matter of everyday practice, and yet the Charvakas declare themselves to be an advocate of perception, and sense perception at that, being the sole organ of knowledge. This only means that according to Charvaka, an empirical organ of knowledge, be it inference, verbal testimony, or any other, is not valid unless its findings are confirmed by sense perception. So this is a broader view of what we mean by sense perception. In other words, the Charvakas have no objection to a piece of knowledge being regarded as valid in case it's not contradicted by sense perception. So this is, also one of the general sort of presumptions in science. One proposes a theory, but it's not proven true unless demonstrated. Demonstration is nothing but making it available for our sense perceptions. So that way, Charvakas were anticipating, a proper methodology to prove, things which should be, certain pieces of cognition which should be held to be true or should be held as cases of knowledge, and so on and so forth. So, if we could skip a few things here. So, and also according to, now we can move on to ethical views of Charvakas. According to Charvakas, the Purushartha theory, according to which there are 4 Purushartha: Dharma, Artha, Kam, and Moksha. Where Dharma refers to religious duty, Artha refers to worldly possessions of wealth, Kama refers to sensual pleasures, and the final end is envisioned as moksha, meaning a spiritual liberation. Of these, Charvakas are known to reject Dharma and moksha as ideals to be pursued in human life. According to them, since the Vedic notion of Dharma makes sense only with reference to karma theory and life after death, it should be rejected straight away, because present life is all there is before us. When we go, our life goes away with us. Similarly, moksha is also rejected as an ethical ideal or pursuit, because pain is the only vice and sensuous pleasure is the only remedy, and both are inevitable in life according to Charvakas. Therefore, artha or worldly possessions as a means and sensuous pleasures as the end of life are the only pursuits worthy of being followed in life. So we could give some of the concluding remarks about the Charvakas. We can say that Charvaka's thought system played an immense role in the development of philosophical ideas in ancient classical India. As famous German philosopher Karl Popper points out, the philosophical job of a true thinker should be not to affirm but falsify the already prevalent theories and hypotheses, because that is the only way to prevent the history, development, and flow of ideas from becoming stagnant. Charvakas, apart from developing their own thought system, which relied completely on logic and observation, also played a crucial role of offering a counter perspective, without which growth of other orthodox schools of philosophy also would not have been possible. Thus, it would not be an overstatement to say that, contrary to their depiction in the Purva Paksha in various orthodox philosophical texts, which are the only sources for philosophy, Charvakas was a philosophical system with sound logical foundation. So this way we see that Charvakas amongst in association with some of the other heterodox philosophies ushered a new kind of an era in Indian philosophy by boldly challenging and contesting some of the metaphysical views that were prevalent around their time, and they emphasize upon logical scrutiny of whatever presumptions or postulates we have, like nobody else did before them. So this way, Charvakas form a very important part of history of ideas in classical Indian philosophy. Thank you.
On that note, I would like to thank Sir for this very enriching discussion, and thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.